Hello and welcome to Atlanta Film and TV's featured artist conversation. I am Mandisa Johnson, and today we are having a conversation with film director Rich Perez. For 20 years, Rich served as a pastor and public speaker, fostering spiritual growth and community development. His 2017 memoir explored the intersection of faith, ethnicity, and the powerful influence of place. Today, Rich has leveraged those experiences as a filmmaker to craft honest and captivating narratives for brands and organizations, using both documentary and narrative styles. Faith and family are a cornerstone in his life, reflecting his belief that the decisions we make throughout the course of our lives is telling a story. Hi, Rich. How are you today?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us. We gave you a brief snippet of who you are, but could you tell us how you got into filmmaking?
Yeah, I mean, I've always loved story. I've always loved storytelling. I think since a child, all the way through college, I studied film theory and film production. So I always imagined myself being in front or behind the camera in some way as I ventured out of college. But uh, life, God had different plans, and so it was in 2020, after probably 17 years total of kind of church and nonprofit work, that our family moved from New York to Atlanta, and I saw that as an opportunity to pivot professionally into the filmmaking world. And my very first introduction to that, professionally speaking, was being hired as an AD, which in retrospect now I realize was kind of a big deal, going from never doing anything on set to being hired as an AD at my first project in North Carolina. And so that was a great learning experience. And, the doors opened from there. One opportunity led to the next. And, you know, 4 years later, we were able to uh, focus on our own production. So,
Wow. So you kind of hit on my next question
sure.
about film directing. Was it something you were always interested in, or is it something, of course, I feel like you answered this part too, that you felt like you were called to do while pastoring?
Well, I think there's a lot of nuance and dimensions to that, to the answer to this. And I think I was not aware of the nuance and the dimensions of the answer to this question until recent. I've always understood myself as a lover of story, whether it was watching cartoons and being captivated by Tom and Jerry. But I think the larger story of even that was I loved it not only because Tom and Jerry were funny and entertaining, but I loved it because I watched it with my dad.
Mm.
And I think that added another level to my experience of something like Tom and Jerry. I loved telling stories. I loved entertaining when I was a kid. I loved putting on, little comedy moments for our family when they were getting together for some family dinners. And all of that love for entertainment, that love for theatrics, kind of bled into all the things that I did. So I would say that I've always loved the idea of theater and entertainment and kind of piquing the interest of whoever would watch. Um, Even so much when I was pastoring. So, like I mentioned before, I pastored for just over 15 years, probably 17, if I do the math right. I always understood my role as a pastor as a kind of storyteller, someone who would keenly observe culture and the world and try to bridge the gap between our lived experiences and what I would consider the story of God, or the story of our faith. As a pastor, my responsibility was to bring these two worlds together, whether it was through my leadership or through my sermonizing or through my, however we kind of designed our communities, worship gatherings, all of that to me felt like decisions toward storytelling, so that people would not just go to church, not just be part of this faith community, but so that they could feel like they were entering a world, like they were entering a story,
Mm.
that at its center was God, and its biggest impact and influences was to our lives. And so I always saw my role, whether it was as a little kid who wanted to entertain my family, or as a pastor who felt the responsibility to lead his church. I saw it all as opportunities to tell a good story.
Wow. That's so I like how you said, you said about like telling a story, like especially like in the Bible. Um, because sometimes to me, the Bible is, especially the King James Version, is hard to read. But if I see it like in story form,
Right.
I'll give an example. When I first moved here, I was a part of a church, and of course, the pastor always read from the King James Version, and a lot of the stuff
Mhm.
would just go over my head. But as soon as I bought like
More contemporary version.
yeah, well, actually, it was a children's Bible. I was
Oh,
able
wow.
to like understand it. And like I know a lot of people who also don't understand like the Bible, but if they are to see it, like
Right.
on camera, on film or whatever, it's easier for them to understand. And I like how you kind of touched on that a little bit. Um, and I like that you kind of ventured off into storytelling. Um,
Yeah, and so if I could, Mandisa, I think it's not simply illustrating Bible stories,
right,
but illustrating in real life Bible, or the kind of themes and values and tensions and nuances, biblical nuances, biblical tensions, biblical themes and values in real life, right? So it isn't, hey, let's try to illustrate,
right.
Jesus feeding the 5,000. No, instead, let's try to illustrate or actualize or visualize what it is that serves as principles, values, lessons from a story like that in real life, in modern times, with modern tensions and modern conversations about what we're experiencing. And to me, I feel like I didn't realize this until much later, but film is such an incredible opportunity for us to, uh, not as a tool as in we want to like use film, but as a way to show that the faith journey is one filled with a lot of twists and turns and tensions if we look at it honestly. And I feel like, as a pastor, I felt like it was my responsibility to try to bridge that gap, between people whose faith feels very isolated and very foreign because it lives in this ancient world and never breaks through into our modern circumstances. I felt the responsibility as a pastor to help bridge that. And oftentimes I saw it most vividly in my sermons where I had to create the language, the bridge, language of how that ancient world really exists in our modern world also.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Could you take us on your journey of how you started in film directing to where
Yeah.
you are now? I know you said it's been, I guess you said over 4 years now.
Yeah, it's been just about 4 years. When my wife and I and our family moved from New York, as I mentioned, I transitioned out of pastoral work.
Mhm.
And I want to say for all of 2021, which was our first full year here in Atlanta, I didn't work, and we were very grateful that we had the kind of financial margin to not need me to work. And I used a lot of that year to kind of figure out how I was going to pivot into, filmmaking. And my very first job was by a good friend of mine who was a friend of mine while I was a pastor many years before. Uh, Derek, Derek Bears, he's Derek Bills. He's a great guy. And he hired me to be the AD, assistant director, on a short film that he was directing in North Carolina. And so for 4 days, I spent 4 days out in North Carolina. And for the whole time I was there, I was fighting imposter syndrome because I'm like, I've never done this before. I've never worked on set. I mean, I have my thoughts and my ideas about how to exist on set, but I've never actually done it. I've spent an entire lifetime career in an entirely different industry. And so I fought imposter syndrome so much those 4 days. And I'll never forget, Derek sat me down the last day of the production, and he said, "Hey, dude, I didn't hire you because you have all the technical skills that I need you to have, or I didn't hire you because you know how to, light a scene. I didn't hire you because you know what buttons to push. I hired you because you're good with people, and because you know how to lead groups of people toward a particular vision." And that was very affirming to me, because I was really struggling. Here I am at that time in my late 30s, starting a new career and feeling a lot of imposter syndrome. And those words were very comforting to me, and they offered me a lot of permission to do this, you know, sloppily, and to kind of figure my way through this new world that I was going to have to navigate. And so that opportunity led me to be the production coordinator on another project, which led me to another and another and another. As it oftentimes goes, one door opens another. And in 2022, my son who's 16, he's been acting for some time. He and I worked together on a short film that I wrote with him as the lead, and we crowdfunded the project, and we kind of invested some of our own money. And we had a 3-day shoot here in Atlanta, and it was fantastic. And it's kind of on the tail end of its festival run now. And then so many other small projects. I've not done anything major yet as far as feature projects are concerned, but most of the work that I've done up to this point have been short narrative, short documentary projects, and it's been fantastic.
Wow. Well, you touched on imposter syndrome. I think a lot of people in film and TV um, deal with it. How would you tell somebody that works in film and TV how to possibly overcome imposter syndrome?
I mean, I think I would say to someone in film and TV how to navigate imposter syndrome the same way I would tell anybody, whatever industry they're in. And it's my young film career has benefited so much from just making room for myself, for being okay with who I am, with being okay with who I'm becoming, with being intentional about navigating myself, my opinions, my thoughts, my perspectives, however ugly I think they are, giving myself the permission to be that for that time, and asking questions, interrogating myself, uh, you know, not in a, harmful way, but in an inquisitive way, in a curious way. Like, why do I think this way? Is this something that I've developed over the course of my life, my practices? Is this something that exists in my family dynamics? From when is this something that shaped me when I was a kid? Like, making room for myself, being inquisitive and curious about who I am in any given season, and being okay with the pace of my evolution, my growth, my transformation as a person has totally relieved me of the pressure of having to be anything in my career. I am what I am at this point of my life. I'm curious enough about myself. I make enough room for myself to discover who I am, who I was made to be, the kind of personalities that I have. And that has again relieved me of putting any pressure on myself professionally, especially in a profession like filmmaking where what prevails are honest stories. You know, filmmaking, your filmmaking career is as successful or is as um influential as you are accepting of yourself. And so I think the advice is really simple. It's live life, be okay with how you are growing, and be okay with the versions of yourself at any given season as you're moving toward growth, right? And I think that's a really important part. Like it's not I'm okay with who I am right now and forever. It's I'm okay with who I am right now because I know that I'm moving toward growth. I know that I'm moving toward learning more about myself, learning more about how I've been wired and been created. And I think that that puts me on a trajectory that says, well, it it matters to me what reputation I have as a human,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't matter to me it doesn't matter to me so much that I become stagnant in the things that I create and produce. In fact, I will create out of that place of curiosity. I will create out of that place of grief. I will create out of that place of sadness, or I'll create out of that place of joy, whatever it is that I'm discovering about myself in that season.
Wow, thank you. I'm sure that's your answer going to help somebody. So we are going to take a break, but we'll be right back. Welcome back to our feature artist conversation with film director Rich Perez. Your film, It Stays With Us, is about a 15-year-old named Ricky who struggles to accept the loss of his mother. Could you share what was the inspiration for the film was?
Yeah, well, a couple things. For one, it is semi-autobiographical. I lost my mom in 2007. However, I was not 15 when I lost her. I was 23 and just recently married. But my younger brother was 15. And so the story is loosely based around his life. And it was just him and my dad after she passed away. But I think the other thing that inspired the movie isn't necessarily autobiographical as much as it is universal. And that's the story of grief. You know, I have a good friend of mine, John O, who's also local here to Atlanta, another artist and creative. He often says that grief is the universal language of humanity.
Mm,
We all speak the language of grief, and though we have different dialects, we all speak the language. And so for me, a huge inspiration was uh, particularly being able to give, or rather highlight the fact that young black and brown boys feel these feelings of grief also.
mm,
And it was important to kind of show the trajectory of what it looks like for a young kid, a young Latino kid particularly, who's probably immersed in a lot of machismo culture, not being able to find the permission to feel certain feelings. Like it was important for me to kind of highlight what does it look like when grief sits on a kid for an extended period of time? How does he react to the world around him? How does he react to the people that try to engage him and love him and try to get close to something that feels very tender? What does it look like for that kid to kind of respond to that. So not just autobiographical, which in fact it was in many ways, but it was also inspired by this universal language that we all speak.
Wow. Well, I'm sorry about your mom. I
Thank you.
lost my mom when I was 7 years old, so I could relate to the film as well as, a young girl whose mom died when I was 7, in second grade, and you know, my dad kind of remarried quickly, so wasn't really
Sure.
much time to grieve. So thank you for sharing that. So your film was recently at the Atlanta Film Festival. Could you share with us what that experience was like?
It was great. It was fantastic. Being newer to this world, um, y- you kind of wonder what your reception will be like. You're entering a new community, you're entering a new world. Not only was I entering a new vocation, but we were also in a new city where I had, very little connections to begin with, let alone in a new industry. And so stepping into the Atlanta Film Festival was so dope because everybody was just so welcoming and so supportive. Like, it's hard not to compare, my previous industry, and the church world and the kind of religious world is great, and I think it offers so many beautiful things, community being one of them. But it was interesting seeing that come alive in the film world, and Atlanta Film Festival being the place where I experienced that the most. I was just happy it was in a festival, honestly, and even more so, such a prestigious one like Atlanta Film Festival. It was just great. Everybody was welcoming and super supportive. I mean, I had so many people showing, so many random people showing support either at the shorts block where it previewed, and um yeah, it was great. It was great. I have nothing but great things to say about my experience in at the festival.
Yeah, I know when we first met you, we said that we were going to try to come, but I went onto the platform and it was sold out. I was like, well, hopefully I
Yeah,
hopefully I can watch it virtually, and I was able to.
and
And
that was part of the response too. I mean, I had received an email about maybe 3 days before our short screen saying, "Hey, we actually had to move the location of your screening because we sold out, and there's a long list of people that are interested in watching it. So we
uh,
needed to just make more space." And then there was an encore showing of it, which was, and again, it wasn't just mine; it was our shorts block, which
yeah.
had incredible short films in it, and so. It was a great response. It was a great response.
Well, congratulations. What do you hope people take away from It Stays With Us?
Probably two things. Permission and courage.
Mm,
Um, Firstly, permission because, as I mentioned before, grief is a very unpleasant feeling, as is sadness, which is, very closely related to grief. And particularly as it relates to people shaped by a machismo culture, a culture that looks at manhood and says you mustn't experience or you mustn't express these more complicated emotions like grief and sadness. I thought it was important for the film. It is important for me for folks to kind of engage with it honestly and discover the permission to feel the full breadth of your emotion, especially the ones that are much harder. And then lastly, courage, because it's one thing to feel the emotion of grief and sadness. It's another thing to find the courage to express it and
mm,
to interrogate it and to extract from it what it desires to give you. Because, yeah, I'm a firm believer that emotions are very important and they're meant to offer you something. You know, they come, I think emotions come bearing gifts.
Mm.
But I think we often forego those gifts because some emotions are just too hard to experience and too hard to interrogate. And so, if anything, I want people to get from the film, it's the permission to feel the full breadth of their feelings, particularly grief, and the courage to actually interrogate them and receive from them what they want to give you.
Wow, that that was good. So this was a question that I did not have, that I didn't do, and I'm not sure why I didn't, but do you have a piece of advice that you would like to give to fellow filmmakers?
Absolutely. Your life is more than the things you produce.
Mm,
Yeah, your life is far more than the things that you produce. And I think that I don't know that I'm fully convinced of that just yet. I think that I'm trying to live into that. Um, or rather, I should say, not that I'm not convinced. I don't know if that's entirely true of me yet. I think sometimes I still believe that I am the things that I make. Um, but my heart wants to believe that I am more than the things that I make. And I think once you come to grips with that reality, you will make some incredibly authentic and beautiful things because you would have relieved yourself of the pressure to try to create for your self-worth. Now you create out of self-worth. And so, practically speaking, what does that look like? It means go live life. Go put the camera down,
mhm.
put the laptop down and go be present with yourself and with the people that deeply love you. Find meaning in the life that you're living. Uh, and I can almost guarantee you that you will find the stories that you are meant to tell on the screen.
Wow, that was amazing, especially in this day and age of social media. That was really good. I like that answer. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Oh, thank you for asking. It's a great question.
Is there anything else you would like to share?
Um, Anything else I'd like to share? No, man, just go out there, live life and make some beautiful things.
Okay. So how can people connect with you?
Yeah, I mean, probably like anyone else. I mean, social media is probably the best place to kind of connect with me. It's at Rich Perez, RichPerez, on Instagram, which is probably the platform I use the most or is most active. Or if you're really interested in seeing some of the work that I've done, our production company, Story 11 Films, is also online, story11.co. Feel free to browse the website. And if you're ever interested in telling some really authentic, beautiful stories, hit us up. We'd love to figure out some partnership.
Well, thank you for joining us today and
Yeah,
answering a
thanks
few
for having me.
questions. And thank you for joining us. Be sure to stay tuned for our next featured artist conversation and subscribe to AtlantaFilmandTV.com.